Why are there so few exploration mechanics in D&D? Why are there basically no rules for roleplay? I mean, there is the influence action, but that's about it. It's the same reason there are no stealth rules in Mothership, no rules for most ordinary equipment in OSR games, and it's the same reason I make no rules for influencing the politics of my world. Or why I think we'd be better off without alignment in D&D, because I want to leave a gap in the mechanics for the narrative. It's high time we talk about a concept in RPG design called the Fruitful Void. Welcome to Mystic Arts, where I try my best to imagine what a void full of tasty, sugary fruit looks like. My name is Daði, I'm a professional writer and director, and I've been DMing for over a decade. Vincent Baker, author of Apocalypse World and Dogs in the Vineyard, said, "Design your game to pose a question, and then don't design it to trample on the answers." He was talking about the Fruitful Void, which is to say the parts of a role-playing game not covered by the mechanics, but they remain essential to the story the game tells. I was first introduced to this concept by DungeonTube neighbor who covers RPG game design, Peter Lang, the author of Tales from Elsewhere. Maybe he can help explain this a little bit? Peter?
Hey Daði, happy to help. So, your initial definition I think is right on the money. A fruitful void is different than just missing rules because the void that it creates is purposeful, and that experience that the game is creating is one that is a result of the surrounding rules, but not expressly articulated in the rules themselves. And I can unpack an example of this. Baker's Dogs in the Vineyard role-playing game is a game about six-shooter Wielden preachers exploring a strange religious Western setting and doling out justice or injustice as they see fit. The themes are about ethics and faith, and yet the game rules themselves don't have a faith stat or an alignment matrix, because that aspect of the greater gameplay experience it's trying to articulate aren't covered in the rules. There's rules for how you shoot your gun and how you die and how you roll dice, but how your character is impacted by the violent actions they take and how their faith could be tested as a result of all that isn't the result of die rolls and depleting faith meters. It's the experience that the surrounding systems and story creates. And that's a fruitful void. That's what the game is about in the end, even though the rules don't tell you how to test your faith.
Right, so the Fruitful Void is a kind of gap or space, a void that we deliberately leave in our RPGs because we don't want to trample on the answers. We want to pose a question. These days, the archetypical example of a fruitful void is Mothership from Tuesday Night Games, where the lead designer, Sean McCoy, made the deliberate choice to not include stealth mechanics because he felt like that would rob the players of the most interesting parts of the game. McCoy could have designed a game that had stealth on the character sheet, like 5th edition D&D does, but he chose not to, because if it was a skill, you could build a character that was all but guaranteed to succeed on every stealth roll made in the game. And then, the game is meaningless. The legally distinct xenomorph is coming down the corridor. You can hear its labored breathing as it's approaching you.
I hide. 36.
You're hidden. It can't find you. Right, so the xenomorph can't find you and the scene is without drama. An empirical mechanic leads to an empirical result. By not defining something, we leave space for the role-playing game to do what it does best, become a conversation. The default game state in every RPG is the conversation. You can try anything. Talk to your DM. Ask them what is in the room. Is there a bed to hide under? A closet to stuff yourself in? Air ducts you can crawl through?
Come out to the coast. We'll get together. Have a few laughs.
That's not up to the mechanics. That's up to the conversation. And through that conversation, other roles might be made. Something that hinders you in other ways. You don't need to make a stealth check using strength if stealth isn't a check and you only ever use other skills. Let me show you.
It's getting closer. Is there a cupboard or a closet?
Yeah, but it's full of stuff. You could quickly move it aside, but you'd probably have to dump it on the floor.
You said there's a vat of water in here? Could I go in there and hold my breath?
Absolutely. Roll for holding your breath. I think that's what makes it a role-playing game. If every part of the game is perfectly defined, for my tastes, it starts veering into board game territory. Once everything's been tokenized, currencied, tracked and numerized, and defined, all that's left is to play the game. It loses, for me, the openness of an RPG. The flip side is also true. Too undefined, too few mechanics, and I start feeling like I'm doing all the work. And what makes RPGs especially complex to design is the fact that everyone's got a different funkometer. The bits I want a game to define are different from the bits that you might want a game to define. I, for one, cannot stand a game with story mechanics, like when an arc is supposed to happen, or when someone's supposed to change their mind, or ask for a scene, or spend a token to do a monologue, or go through a change, or mark off something and develop feelings, or create dramatic scenes. I personally hate all that, because for me, that's not the bit I want to close. That's the bit I want to be open, because I know a lot about stories, but also because that's the bit I love doing. I love telling stories, I love writing stories, acting out stories. Don't take that away from me or my players. But there are other people who disagree. I have friends who recommend RPGs to me because they love story mechanics. And they think, hey, you're a story guy, you'll love this story thing. They think that's a good thing. There should be different kinds of systems for different kinds of people who like different kinds of things. I don't think that's controversial. This video is sponsored by World Anvil. It's an incredible suite of creative tools for game masters, players, fantasy and sci-fi authors, and multimedia storytellers. They have a built-in digital GM screen and campaign manager with support for 106 or more tabletop RPG systems, including a robust gallery of stat blocks and character sheets, plus tools to build and share your own homebrew content. It includes interactive maps, family trees, timelines, and automatic linking to create rich and engaging worlds for your game, novel, or series if you're writing. It's especially useful if you're someone who's world building and you really like the idea of getting prompted by a bit of software or something asking you what sort of stuff you should be building, asking about secrets or factions or family locations. It's all built into the site. If you use this promo code, you will get 51% off of your next yearly subscription. So go use the link in the description so they know who sent you. What makes RPGs special is their relationship between open and closed games, or in particular, which bits are open and which bits are closed. How granularly do we close those bits, and how small are the openings that are offered? Actually, that may be a little bit beyond my understanding. Peter, what is the difference between open and closed games in RPG design?
Boy, you picked some hornet's nest topics here. This one is often debated in RPG circles, particularly among game designers, as to what is the best approach, and I'm of the firm belief that there is no best approach. Open versus closed isn't a binary situation, but rather a spectrum within the game rules. A game that is more open leaves more open to interpretation by the players and the game master during play. It usually provides structural game rules that give you the broad strokes of which dice to pick up and what numbers to add, but leaves the exact details of how those work in play up to that table. A game that's more closed tends to be more explicit in how its rules work and try to spell out a variety of situations. These tend to be more robust and often deep from a mechanical standpoint games, but they often require you to flip through and find the citation needed to handle a specific situation. And there are games that run the gamut all the way across this spectrum, from the extremely open, like playing free Kriegspiel style games, to the very concrete and more closed, like Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Neither of those games are better or worse role-playing games than the other, but they definitely cater to different tastes. Some GMs prefer to let the rules sit in the background of the gameplay experience and only pulling them out when actually needed, and those kind of GMs tend to like more open games. While if GMs prefer rules that are in the foreground, where the players and the GM are playing with their minis and referencing rules and using abilities, well, they're going to favor more of those closed style games. Again, open and closed, not a matter of what's good or bad, it's purely stylistic.
So a 100% closed game is basically a board game. A 100% open game, that's just make-believe with no rules. RPGs are the spectrum in between. Closed games can feel safer, like you're less likely to screw them up, since there is so much guidance. Games like Draw, Steal, and Pathfinder are written in a way to minimize petty arguments about rulings. You can just read the rules and they explain everything, which means that it's one of the most closed games around, but they're still RPGs. Games like Shadowdark are very open. This book is full of procedures and guidance, but very little is defined enough to be hard-coded and closed, which can feel reassuring when you're reading the book. Oh, thank God, this book is very short. But for a 5e DM who starts running it, they might panic and go, how do I resolve this? There's no mechanic. Where you are on the spectrum, is up to you to find out. And I don't even think it's up for you to decide. I think you will discover your taste. I can't tell you the answer. All I'm trying to do with this video is introduce you to the language that already exists around the topic. So by those definitions, what's D&D about? Well, it's a closed loop of combat mechanics. There is very little creativity in combat. You can of course describe your actions. Remember that flavor is free, but there really isn't much beyond that. If you want to drop something heavy on a monster, by the rules, you split the falling damage between the dropped object and the dropped person, or the dropped and the droppee. If you want to swing on a chandelier, I could give you advantage, but I think that's about it. You can be more creative, of course, but it's not the nature of the game. The game, 5th edition, has a fairly closed combat loop. For social encounters, there is a brief column in the influence action describing how you could resolve it mechanically, but since no other mechanics interact with the influence action, it's basically up to DM fiat, with this written column serving as guidance. For exploration, well, there is barely anything. Various spells, class features, and backgrounds imply a certain amount of solutions in a can that can be opened to solve a problem. But what are the problems? Well, the DMG has hazards, terrains, treasures you can find, and adventures offer you locations that you could explore, but no real indication of how that works. Opinionated know-it-alls on YouTube, hi, hello, that's me, will make various procedures you can use to elevate your exploration in your game, in effect, closing it so that it's more limited. Hopefully those limits help hem in creativity to a point where you can actually start creating, since you now have the shapes to fill. Maybe you picked up the dungeoneering rules or the hexploration rules off of my Patreon and found it useful. Maybe you picked them up and went, this isn't enough, I want more rules. And maybe you said the opposite. This goes on and on and on, I don't need this stuff. Both opinions are true. It's down to taste. I think D&D doesn't have the exploration rules by default because the designers want the adventure you're playing to dictate what exploration rules are being used. Tomb of Annihilation has hex crawl rules because you really need them to play that adventure. Dungeon of the Mad Mage couldn't have had anything useful for those rules in there, so they have a dungeon crawl instead. If classes keyed right into exploration rules and the campaign you're running didn't use any exploration rules, or even just didn't use those specific exploration rules, then those class features would be dead features. They'd be worthless. So instead, the classes focus on the one thing that's true no matter what kind of exploration features are in the adventure: combat. That's the only closed loop. It's common for people to look at a system, especially the really big and popular ones, and assume that omissions are oversights. And, they can be. But in point of fact, choosing what to omit is a crucial part of the art form. OSR games usually don't define what a 10-foot pole is for because the players are expected to use it in various creative ways, especially tapping the flagstones of the dungeon floor and ceiling, and the mirror being peeking around corners. Don't write that into the description. There is no advantage for cross-corner peeking. It just lets you do it. Depending on your sources, there was a contingent of RPGers in the 1970s who played the entire game like the wish spell. They worded all their actions super carefully to make sure that they were never gotcha'd by the DM, and to avoid rolling any dice. That sounds like the most open game to me. So I don't have a conclusion to present to you. I just wanted to introduce you to these ideas, to think about what you think about them, to find out what you think about them, to find out what you prefer, open games or closed games. Open where? Which mechanics do you want open? Closed where? Which mechanics do you want closed? Every HEMA or historical combat reenactor I have played with hates D&D's combat rules because they are closed in a way the hobbyists disagree with. Whereas people who don't know much about armor or whatever seem perfectly fine with it most of the time. Economists or people into finance I know disagree with D&D's economy because it's rigorous enough to fool us laymen most of the time, but not the specialists. For further reading, I want to send you to Ben Milton's video on the subject, where he talks about how Brennan thinks D&D is the perfect system for him because it models what he doesn't care about, combat, and it lets the DM model what Brennan cares about, the story. I agree with Brennan, but that's just my opinion. I think it's beautiful that we can disagree on what we like, but we can still learn from one another. This hobby we're playing in is so tiny, but so much of it is filled with creativity, art, design, and wonder within it. Everyone's got their own style, their own ideas, their own preferences. So I think we should study ourselves and discover what we like, discover what we don't like, and I think we'll all be one step closer to running better games. And that's where we'll pick it up next time. If you want to support us directly, come by our Patreon and get access to bonus videos, my session prep notes, and podcasts where I tell stories from our own games. If you're feeling especially generous, you might like the video, comment, share, or subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified when we release new videos. And until next time, keep studying the mystic arts.